And hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Chapters here on Armstrong Television. Chapters is the television show that profiles authors, editors, and publishers in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky. I'm Eliot Parker, and it's great to have you with us. On our program today, we have author Lynne Squires with us today to talk to us about her memoir, Letters to My Son, Reflections on an Urban Appalachia at Mid-Century. And Lynne Squires is a West Virginia author who writes primarily creative nonfiction, but she also dabbles in other genres as well. She authors the widely read blog The View from My Cup, in which her views, both literal and cerebral, come forth. She's a Scrabble enthusiast, an architecture junkie, and a collector of Blenko glass, flower frogs, and Fiesta dishes. And she also loves to travel and also likes to spend time on her back porch. And as she often says many times, after all, sometimes that's all the further you really need to go. And we have an opportunity to talk to her about her great collection here, her great memoir, Letters to My Son. So Lynne, first of all, welcome to Chapters.
Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about where the idea for this book came from and what got you thinking about writing this and putting it together as you did.
Actually, it started with a short story, and I belonged to a writing group here in Huntington, and I read part of it at the group, and Carter Seaton was there, and she said to me afterwards, "I'm so glad that you're writing about urban Appalachia because there's so much about rural Appalachia, but not so much about urban." And she said, not everybody butchers pigs in the backyard. And so that kind of spurred the whole idea to actually make it into a full book.
Very good. I wanted to ask you too about your title, Urban Appalachia at Mid-Century. You talked a little bit about urban Appalachia. For some of our audience who maybe aren't from here or don't really know the categories of Appalachia, how does urban Appalachia differ from maybe rural Appalachia in terms of setting and motifs and conventions and things like that?
Well, rural, of course, is what everybody thinks of when you think of Appalachia. The country, dirt roads, farmers, that sort of thing. Urban Appalachia, of course, anything in the city or suburban areas would be included in that also. And I grew up right outside Charleston in a suburban area. And, the experience is just completely different than it is to grow up in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Mid-century, why did you pick this time period, the middle century, middle part of the 20th century, to focus on for your book?
Well, I was alive then, so that was part of it. But primarily just my son, was written in the format of letters to him. He's young, he's in his early 20s, late teens when I started this. And so I wanted him to be able to relate to stories in my childhood and as I was growing up, things, an era that he had just passed through himself. So he'd be able to compare his life with what my life was like then, and also because I don't want him to get out into the rest of the world, and when people find out he's from Appalachia, have the exact same experience I had, where people think you don't wear shoes, or you walk to school uphill both ways in the snow, and that sort of thing. And it's just a different thing than it is to be rural. So I wanted him to know where I came from compared to what he grew up with.
Very good. And we were introduced early on and at various points throughout your book to Duncan. So tell us a little bit about your son and the kind of relationship you all have and why he was the person that you wrote to.
Well, it's the only child I have, so he kind of got that by default. But he's 21. He's a junior at Marshall. Very proud of him. He's a very, very brilliant young man. I think it's kind of a legacy, something to leave to him. His grandparents, both sides, were deceased already, by the time he was born. So some of these stories take him back a generation or two, into like my mother, my grandmother, and grandfather. So he gets a little bit of his ancestry that way.
You tell us so many great stories about your life, written to Duncan in many ways. One of the ones I found so interesting was fast food. And you talk about TV dinners and how that was kind of something at the time when you were growing up that was considered fast food, and how now, we're spoiled and we're pampered a little bit by all these fast food options, right, and we can really go anywhere. Tell us a little bit about that part of your book and some of the things that you write about in that section in addition to the TV dinners.
Well, TV dinners, I started with that because that was fast food when I was a child, although now, as you know, it takes half hour more to cook one. But we had a very few places to choose from. We had Sonny's hot dog stand, where you could buy a big bag of 10 hot dogs for $2 or something like that. We had an A&W root beer with the frosty mugs and everything. And I mentioned at some point we got a BBF in town, which was the home of the whirling satellite, but I never knew what BBF stood for. And I've had numerous people tell me what it stood for, but I just didn't know when I was a kid it was the whirling satellite place, And a few other places showed up, but back then, cars weren't even equipped for fast food. You didn't have cup holders, to put your drink in. You might drive to the A&W and they roll the window down and put the little tray, beside it, and that was fast food, back then. I prayed for a girl on roller skates because, you see on TV they skate to your car, and that never happened where I lived, but thought that would have been kind of cool.
Yeah, and that is something that people of this generation really forget about. We hear about that, and occasionally you come across one of those old-timey diners,
Right.
that are still in existence today, but in many cases it is definitely from a forgotten era. I know this book is set up as you write to Duncan in many of the sections, kind of like an epistolary story where you've got these letters that you've written to him, and you dedicate the book to him, from my son with Duncan with love. In putting this memoir together, did the letters come first, or did you write the story and then think about what would you say to Duncan? How did the process come in terms of getting the addresses to Duncan put into the book? Which came first and why?
I think the ideas for each chapter pretty much came first. And in each of the little letters, I kind of wanted to make a reference to rural Appalachia, too, so he would have a point of reference, what we're balancing this against, for example. But a couple of them, the letters just kind of rolled out and the story followed, but most of the time it was the topic showed up and then the letter came a little bit later to go with it.
Which did you find as you were putting this together was your most difficult section to write?
Probably the section about events, which that in itself doesn't really differentiate rural and urban Appalachia because they happen in all of our world. But just the memories that brought up, talking about JFK and things like that, the space shuttle, blowing up and stuff. That was just emotionally kind of difficult because it took you back there. Another section that was kind of hard was on gardening, where I talk about my mom and what all she did with gardening. Because now that I'm kind of into gardening, I really miss her and her knowledge base with all that stuff. But that's why there's the flower on the front that's on there, because we had a huge magnolia tree in our yard, and that was just kind of a homage to my mom, I guess.
Very nice. Something else I really like about your book is we have pictures that pop up here in various sections. For example, on page 135, we've got a section on toys, which as a big toy person, as a kid growing up, I really enjoyed reading that, and you talking about the Sears Roebuck catalog, which I can even remember growing up. And of course, most teenagers today of Duncan's age have no idea what the Sears Roebuck catalog was. Tell us a little bit about these pictures. Where did they come from? And we can put this picture of toys up on the screen for our viewers, and we will. We see a little girl, and it looks like a doll baby to the left and then a dog to the right. So
Right.
Who's in this picture, and tell us about it, and tell us a little bit about all the pictures that are in your books.
Well, the little girl in the middle is me, and the doll is a life-size doll. Her name was Patty, but for whatever reason I called her Patty-O. And at that point, I was a couple of years younger than the doll was supposed to look, but I was always tall for my age. So, and the dog was our dog that we had growing up, our boxer. So that was us hanging outside our house.
Very nice, and I think the pictures really give a nice visual component to some of the things that you're working on. So tell us a little bit about the process that you undertook to put this together. I know we were talking about this some before we started taping, in terms of time frame, and what was your writing process like as you put this memoir together?
It took about 2 years. The first 18 months or so, I was working full-time at a non-writing job, so I wrote in my spare time. The last 6 months went pretty quickly because that's all I was really focusing on was that. But some of the things, the process slowed a little bit because I actually had to do a little bit of research. When I was talking about a news channel on TV, I had to look and see what network they were actually on, and a few things like that I couldn't remember necessarily. Just some small details like that. It's like you know them, but you can't remember what they are. So I had to Google some stuff. So it was interesting. I pretty much came up with all the chapters, what I was going to write about for all the chapters, and kind of just went back and filled in the blanks as I went.
So do you write pen to paper? Do you sit down at the computer and type as you go? What's that like for you?
Mostly I write at the computer. Occasionally I write pen to paper, but not very often. My handwriting is horrible now that I type almost everything, so it's really not fast for me to write that way. I enjoy that though, and I've been known to do that, but I've also been known to write on my phone if I'm in a place where I don't have anything else to write on, I'll just, text away to myself. Different formats. I have a tablet I go take out on my patio and write outside and stuff, so wherever the muse hits.
I was going to say, you can basically write just about anywhere that you go. I wanted to ask you just in general about urban Appalachia, because you mentioned you were from Charleston and had a different experience than maybe my parents did, who grew up in rural settings in West Virginia had. What is it about urban Appalachia that makes it unique? Because a lot of people that were I grew up in Charleston as well. Farm life is something that doesn't interest me. I mean, I think it's great to read about, it's nice to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there, kind of thing. What is it about, in your experience and having written this book about urban Appalachia, that makes people really kind of hold true to that? Just like people hold true to sort of their rural Appalachian roots, people that lived in the cities in Appalachia, hold a firm belief to that, and a firm belief to that lifestyle. What is it about that you think, or why that is?
Well, I'm not even so sure that we hold as firmly to it as people from the rural areas do. I think that all of us, unless you were a Rockefeller or Vanderbilt back in the day, we all came from a rural background a few generations back, so we all have that. As far as what's special about urban Appalachia, nothing really. I had somebody make the comment that in reading this, they really couldn't tell if I was talking about growing up here in Appalachia or if I was talking about growing up in New Mexico. And I said, well, that's kind of the point of the book, because rural Appalachia is kind of like anywhere USA. It's not, urban Appalachia is. It's not defined as well as easily as you define rural Appalachia. It's our roots, but it's different. We were as progressive as we could be, for that generation and time. The whole time I grew up, I never remember doing anything to the strains of a banjo in the background or fiddles. I mean, the way we're portrayed in the media is just blatantly not accurate in most situations. I have a lot of shoes. We had shoes growing up, I rode in a car to school. I didn't walk to school in the snow. So a lot of those stereotypes, I hope to sort of debunk a lot of those with this book, that we were just, leave it to beaver sort of normal family.
What do you think about Appalachia as a whole makes this place so unique to the people that have lived here and still live here? What makes it so special?
I think because our ancestors did have a pretty hardscrabble life. I mean, this is not an easy terrain to live in. I mean, if you look at West Virginia alone, there's not a lot of flat land here. We don't have much industry here as a result of that. It's a hard way to come up. It's the weather. We definitely live in some place where there are 4 seasons, all of them. If you're in the higher mountains, it's especially harder. But, that it's a poor area compared to a lot of other areas, and it's a pretty wide area. A lot of people don't realize it goes from the bottom of New York to clear over to the foothills in Mississippi and Arkansas. So I just think there's a cohesiveness because we do have an actual geographic area that binds us together. We're not out west someplace where it's flat from here to there and everything in between. I think that's probably it, just that because we hail from rural roots a lot of times, that sort of thing binds all of us together.
You mentioned the map, or the stretch of Appalachian. I know you included a map in here that kind of illustrates the Appalachian region. You put that in your introduction section. Where did that map come from?
If you Google Appalachian map, that exact map comes up like 8,000 times, so that's kind of like the map. I mean, universities use it in Appalachian Studies, Time Magazine, everybody, that's like the map. So I have seen ones that don't include quite as large an area to the west, the southwest, but if you include the foothills of the mountains, that it's in there.
Okay. And we'll put this map up on the screen for our viewers to see also. One of the things that caught my attention, and you touched on this a moment ago, as you look at this, and I think some of this comes from the media in terms of people's misunderstanding, but you're right, you can actually classify the Appalachian region as southern New York all the way down into Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. But what makes West Virginia interesting is we're the only state totally engulfed sort of in that swath of area considered Appalachia. And I think one of the things that's interesting, and you kind of touch on this in your book through your stories, is that we're interchanged, and people think of West Virginia and Appalachia as the same, where they use them interchangeably, primarily because we're the only state that's kind of totally engulfed in that area. And there is so much of the small town feel and people knowing each other and that kind of thing that comes through in your work. I wanted to ask you also a little bit about two things that you write about in your book, which are so interesting, is Christmas, and you talk a little bit about Easter and clothing in the clothing section. I loved when you were writing about Easter dress and what a big event that was, and I loved when you wrote about Christmas. Tell us a little bit about that. What was that like for you growing up in the mid-century, and how has that changed for Duncan as someone who's coming up sort of in the 21st century Appalachia?
Well, I think a lot of our traditions I tried to hold to as far as what my family did for Christmas with Duncan. A lot of things that repeat themselves, but a lot of things don't. We had like an 8-foot silver Christmas tree when I was growing up. That was a big deal, and I wish I had it now because those are kind of back again. But he never saw a silver Christmas tree, I don't think, in his house until we had one last year. But that sort of thing. But as far as get-togethers and family and cooking and presents and stuff, that's pretty much the same as it was for me as a kid. I wanted to carry that through to another generation. Easter and clothes, that's every girl's dream, to get the whole outfit from stockings all the way up to a hat, gloves, purse, the whole 9 yards. And I also used to get a new dress for the Sunday before Easter, so Palm Sunday. It wasn't as elaborate or anything, but it was still a new dress. It was a big deal. So, the clothing factor alone made Easter a pretty swell time.
Sure, absolutely. I love those two chapters in the book. I think those are so interesting and poignant to see kind of the comparison there. Do you think that Duncan's generation is missing out on anything that your generation had that maybe he's not going to get to experience? And I don't say that from a parenting perspective, but just as society has changed and as our conventions have changed, and we have cell phones now and computers and all these other electronic devices that distract us, as an example, is he missing out on something? Do you wish that he would get, in his generation, would get to experience some of the things that you did?
Absolutely. I think, of course, the cell phone age, being honest, we miss a lot of interpersonal relationship moments, but it seems like in watching Duncan and his contemporaries, the bond with family seems a lot looser than it was when I was his age or younger. It was always a big deal to have family over. Christmas Eve, it was the whole family, and 4th of July, the whole family. His family, his dad's family is from New Jersey and New York, so they're kind of not even close to here, but we never really had a lot of that with him, and I didn't like that so much for him. And if I could do anything different, it would be to give him those moments probably of family togetherness. But it's just general disconnect nowadays with everybody.
Yeah, which is interesting because we have ways to stay in contact so much more now, but yet we are so more disconnected.
Right.
I mean, you can talk to someone on Facebook across the world even in real time, but yet you know a lot of people, but you don't have any relationships,
Right.
if that makes any sense. And I think that is an interesting point. So you're a memoir writer. What are some writers that influence you, either other memoir writers or other writers that you really enjoy reading? Who's influenced your work as a writer?
Well, I never thought I would write a memoir. That's not my big dream, actually. It just kind of happened to be the first thing I did. But probably Carter Seaton has been very instrumental with her work, her writing style. She writes fiction and nonfiction, which I hope to do someday. She kind of was probably the first person to let me know that that's okay, that writers do that. You don't have to pick one or the other. You can do whatever you want. Sheila Redling, who writes under S.G. Redling, a good friend and very encouraging with other writers' work. She's always there for me when I have the dumbest questions imaginable. She's there to let me know that either she's had them and they're not that dumb, or no question's dumb. So I admire her work a lot too. Sue Grafton, as far as, other writers not local that I don't know. I don't know. She's probably my very favorite writer. She writes cozy mysteries, which, the novel that I'm working on is a cozy mystery. So I admire her. I like her writing style.
We mentioned at the beginning of the program that you have a blog called The View from My Cup.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about your blog, what's on there, and what are some of the things that you like to write about there?
Well, the view from my cup is always a picture of whatever my literal view is, and you can see the edge of a cup or a bottle or whatever I'm drinking out of at the moment in the scene. There have been views of my garden, of vacation spots that we've been on or been to, my son, just whatever at the moment. Sometimes they're, like for example, a few weeks ago I had one about trees because we have this ginormous pine tree in the yard next door to us, and we have new neighbors that live there, and I'm like petrified they're going to cut the tree down. So I wrote a bit about what trees mean to me and how I think we ought to try to maintain trees wherever possible and not just level the landscape. So sometimes things that are issues with me I write about. I don't visit anything that's like political or religious because I don't. But lots of things, gardening, whatever, just whatever strikes my fancy, my view.
Very good, very good. I've checked out your blog, and it is great. And I love the opening shot of you with the cup or the
yeah.
item that you can look right over and see exactly where you are, which is really great. You mentioned you're working on a cozy mystery. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that. Where are you in the process, and when do you think you'll have a draft finished?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm about 30,000 words into it, so I have a ways to go. But I recently decided I think I'm going to switch to first person from third person, so that'll be a little task. I don't know. I'd like to finish it before the end of next year, hopefully.
Very good. Excellent.
But I'm actually working on a different book right now that I'm working on, a kind of a companion book to this. It's a cookbook called Mid-Century Meals, and it has some pictures of table settings and stuff of dishes from mid-century, and then different entrees, appetizers, side dishes, alcoholic beverages, things like that were like really what a lot of people had during that era that you may not even have now, or you might still, but that particular era in cooking brought about a lot of changes. We had the onset of like canned soup. You can take that where you're going with it, with casseroles and stuff. Better ways to preserve foods and things like that. So the gist of what people ate was a lot different in the 50s and 60s than it was in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, very true, very good. So Lynne, in our final moments with you, if someone in our audience wants to get in contact with you to talk about Letters to My Son or to get a copy of the book, how can they get in contact with you? Where can they find copies of your book?
It's on Amazon. It's here at Empire Books also. You can go to my website, which is mlynne.com. There's a link there to get the book, and also links to my blogs and stuff.
Great, fantastic. Letters to My Son, Reflections of Urban Appalachia at Mid-Century is the subject of our discussion today. Lynne Squires is the author. Congratulations, Lynne, on this great book. And as Carter Seaton says here on the front cover, it's a little gem that nostalgically reveals the other side of growing up in Appalachia. It indeed does that, and I think our audience will find a lot of very good, interesting, and relevant stories in there. So congratulations again, and thanks so much. And
Thank you.
As you keep writing and keep publishing, we'll have you back on Chapters to talk about it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And we want to take a moment to say thanks to our sponsor, Empire Books and News, who provides our studio taping space each and every time here on Chapters. We encourage you to stop by Empire Books and News to check out their selection of books and magazines, pick up a copy of Lynne's book, as well as some of the other authors and publishers that we've had featured on here. They also have their works for sale right here at Empire Books and News at Pullman Square in downtown Huntington. So please stop by and talk to Charlotte and her staff. Let them get you the reading material that you need. That's right here at Empire Books and News. And if you've got a question, comment, or suggestion about this chapter's program, we've made that available to you, and a way to get in contact with us through an email address, which comes up right here at the bottom of the screen, lp4@zoominternet.net. That's how you can reach out to us here on the show. So please keep those comments and feedback coming. And if you've missed a previous episode of Chapters, you want to go back and see it again, maybe for the second or third time, we've made that available to you through the Armstrong One Wire page on YouTube, and that address is also here at the bottom of the screen. It's www.youtube.com/Armstrong One Wire. From there, click on the Chapters tab, and you can find all the author, publisher, and editor interviews from our 3+ seasons of Chapters episodes right there on YouTube. So we encourage you to check that out as well. And that's going to do it for us this time on Chapters, but please come again next time. And in the meantime, stay tuned to this station for news and views that impact you and your community.